Okay, people, I could not be here today, obviously, as you are aware. And I felt bad that you might miss out on some actual productive learning today. So we are going to go for it. And hopefully your teacher will be able to pause this video as the information comes up, give you guys some time to write things down, and you will be able to accomplish everything that we would have accomplished together if I was there. The first thing you need to know is that you will choose what type of notes you would like to take in order to successfully learn what you need to learn about the types of evolution. I have created a web that I've printed out. I don't have enough necessarily for everyone, but I was banking on the fact that you want to make your own web, or maybe you want to take traditional notes, doodle notes, or another type of graphic organizer. This is going to be your choice. So as long as you're able at the end of class to identify and describe the different types of evolution outlined in our textbook, and as long as you're able to describe examples of each type, I don't really mind what type of notes you create for yourself, as long as you are creating some form of notes for yourself today. So the teacher can pause this now and give you guys time to get set up with colored paper, markers, colored pens, or just your traditional line paper, maybe a highlighter, anything you need. The different types of evolution can be mixed up pretty easily, but if you think about the words that make up the different types, if you think about the vocab and you really break it down and you look at the roots, then you will be able to keep these different types of evolution straight in your mind. The first type of evolution has a root co. So just try to think a little bit of what words include the root co, and what that could mean. Co means together. So for example, cooperate is that it means that you're operating together with one or more other people. So you're cooperating and you're working together. And so that root co is really important, because we're also going to be talking about coevolution, which is going to essentially mean that things are going to evolve together. When two species interact with each other for long periods of time, they will evolve alongside one another. This often leads to specialized relationships where the two species that have been evolving together for so long, they actually start to depend on each other, which it could happen. So for this first example, that's exactly what's going on. So some birds' beaks will be long and slender depending on the flower it prefers. So we don't really know what started to evolve first. Did the flower start to evolve first, or perhaps did the hummingbird start to evolve first? When we look at this, maybe the flowers were a little bit shorter. The previous types of flowers in this species were shorter, and as the flowers got longer, only the hummingbirds with the longer beaks were able to access the nectar inside, and then those were the types of flowers that were getting pollinated. So then all of the species, all of the offspring of these flowers are getting longer and longer and longer. And as the offspring of the flowers are getting longer and longer, then the hummingbirds, to access the nectar for food, they have to have longer and longer beaks. So these two species in particular have been evolving together so long that now these flowers could exclusively only be reached by these types of hummingbirds. So that's one example of coevolution. These two species, these flowers and the hummingbirds, are evolving together. Another classic example would be predatory or competitive relationships. So I chose a specific example that was predatory, of a crab and a snail. So if the crab is a natural predator of the snail, then natural selection is actually going to favor snails with thicker shells, and maybe the shells with spines on them, because if the crabs can eat the easier snails with the easier shells, then the snails that get to reproduce are the ones that have the thicker shell, and then the spines that are kind of harder to be eaten by the crabs. So through natural selection, crabs evolve more powerful claws that can pierce the snail's thick spiny shells. So you have the snail that's evolving and becoming tougher, but then you have the crab that's evolving and becoming tougher as well, because only the strongest, toughest crabs can get enough food by getting through these tougher, more spiny shells of the snails. And so then this just continues to happen back and forth. So you have snails that are getting tougher, crabs that are getting tougher, and so this co-evolution relationship is happening because of natural selection. Okay, so moving on to the next type of evolution that we're going to look at, we need to know the root con and the root verge. So hopefully if you know co, then you also know con. So if we're looking at con, it is also going to mean together, but we're not looking at evolving together as a relationship. We are actually looking at the direction of the species coming together. Okay, so that kind of sounds a little confusing, but let's dig into it a little more. So when you're looking at convergence, so you have this word converge or convergence, it just means that two separate things are moving in the same direction, and they're coming together. So when you're looking at convergent evolution, this is when organisms are not closely related, but they independently evolve similar traits as a result of having to adapt to similar environments or ecological niches. So let's have you write this down, but I realized that I'm using this word niche, and we really have not talked about it as a class. So, side note, hopefully you can just pause your writing and listen what a niche is. So a niche is a very specific role that an organism has in a certain habitat. So this includes the organism's behavior. This includes what the organism needs to survive. So when I ask you, what is a niche, you should just be able to say, oh, an organism's niche in a habitat is everything it needs to survive, all of the interactions it has with other organisms, and the role that it fills in the environment. So to give you a really concrete example, before, when we were talking about co-evolution, we were looking at this hummingbird situation. So part of the hummingbird's niche is that it has to pollinate these flowers. That's its role in the environment. Its role in the environment is pollinating these flowers. Its niche is pollinating them because it gets food from them, but also continues the flowering species so that all of the hummingbirds even have more food available. So, side note, niche means an organism's specific role and interactions in a habitat. Let's go back to convergent evolution. Okay. So these organisms are not even related, but they are actually similar to each other because of the environment that they are living in together. Examples. One example is streamlining. So the physical appearance of marine animals, if you'll notice, is very similar. So a shark is a fish, a dolphin is a mammal, but both of them are streamlined because they live in an aquatic and marine environment. And so they need to be streamlined because the more streamlined you are, then the faster you can swim. An ichthyosaur is actually a type of dinosaur, and that's also streamlined. And then a penguin is obviously not always living in the water, but it hunts in the water, and it has to be streamlined and swim fast because then it can get away from predators. So all of these organisms are not related, but they've sort of converged together in their evolution because they have the same characteristic of streamlining. Another example that's not as obvious is that bats and butterflies have the ability for flight, but the wings evolved from different structures. So bats and butterflies are completely